Hey everybody, welcome to my review of Alone Frozen Episode 6. This is a historic moment in Alone history. So I am calling this episode the first all-women episode of Alone ever. Because why wouldn't I? As always, I'm going to be talking about what we are seeing in this episode of Alone Frozen and also some other related concepts and some survival topics. I'm going to be talking about string silencers and why they're important at the end of this episode. I'm also going to be talking about some of the bigger themes we're seeing, talking about the concept of connection as a survival skill, why that matters. Also talking about a theme we see all of us talking about out there, which is finding our place in the world as a woman and the struggle for self-worth and how we have turned to nature for healing. I'm going to be giving you my technique and recipe for the best snack food of Alone history, which I discovered and we see evidence of on Alone Frozen. This episode begins with Callie finally doing better after being so sick at the end of the last episode. So glad to see this. So happy that she was able to bring herself back around. It looks like the key to it was just stopping eating those mussels. Now, Callie didn't start out with a seafood allergy out there. It's something that developed over time, and this is a thing that can happen when we are eating just one food and relying on it solely. I saw a friend of mine go through this, eating a ton of eggs to bulk up and developing an allergy to eggs. So the last episode, she was saying, I don't feel like eating these mussels, but they're all I've got, so I'm going to eat them, and then getting so ill and really doing poorly. Hugely grateful to see that she is finally feeling better in those ways. Callie talks about a really important thing, which is that she's choosing to push through her discomfort and find what is on the other side. This is something I've talked about a lot in these reviews and something that Alone really brings up for us, right? No matter what you do, no matter how skilled you are, it is going to be hard out there and you're going to be very uncomfortable, and finding that place inside that is able to push through that discomfort within reason and only in the ways that are good for us. But this idea that that is something that builds resilience and personal strength and knowing that we have the capacity to do well out there. Which also brings me to Callie talking about a serious tragedy in her life. Her entire family being in a bad car accident, losing one brother to the accident, and then following that, another brother to suicide. How unbelievably devastating that time in her life must have been. And we can all see, all of us who watch Callie know that she is an incredibly strong and resilient, and not just resilient and capable, but upbeat and positive person. Going through really hard things absolutely builds resilience. And it's very clear that Callie took that tragedy and turned it into a guiding stone for her life, into making really good choices, honoring herself, and never compromising on living her best life every day. It's similar to what we see on the Alone experience, right? That sense of having almost nothing, making you appreciate so much more the things you have. That sense of being so close to potential starvation, accident, injury, death. Those things make us appreciate the life we have so much more in every moment. This life is a gift. We are not entitled to it. We don't know when it's going to end, and how important it is to carry that into all of the choices that we make. So I'm really glad that you talked about that, Callie, and you shared that deep insight into part of what made you who you are. And who you are is so beautiful and so inspiring. So much love to you, and thank you. Hey guys, please remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notifications bell if you want to hear when my videos come out. Also, I would encourage you to join my Patreon team if you like what I'm doing and you want to support it and you want to be a bigger part of it. We have regular interactive Zoom calls. We really get to know each other, and it's a really supportive community around ancestral skills, survival skills, wilderness living, and connection to nature. We then see me with a very low tide. You guys, it is hard for me to describe how amazing this was. As of the last couple of episodes, I was really not sure that there were going to be enough mussels to see me through. And then we had this amazing low tide that revealed all of the mussels that were deep out there. So we see me the first time harvesting mussels in this episode. The tide isn't that low. I'm still wading in almost to the tops of my boots out there to get them. It also sees me talking about my childhood, and definitely something that shaped me and made me part of who I am was being an only child having my parents split when I was young so that it was just my mother and I in the household. And we were struggling financially. My mother was going to college, so at night school. So I was by myself a lot. Now, my father was always in my life. He lived nearby and I saw him, but he wasn't in the house with us. So I didn't see him anywhere near as often as I had previously. And my mother and I really were the family unit in many ways. And I would say that it was more about being an only child than my folks having split. That meant that I was lonely a lot as a kid, but it also meant that I had to find company in myself. I had to learn how to be comfortable on my own. And then my mother also got cancer when I was 7. So just a couple years after my parents split, and just her and I. And that really shaped me. And again, that awareness of death and awareness not to take anything for granted and finding the strength in myself. So like Callie, I was definitely shaped by some intense things early in my life. The strongest steel goes through the hottest fire. And I feel like the 3 women we're seeing out there and their stories, also Amos, who went through an incredibly challenging childhood too. This season, Alone Frozen, is such a beautiful, beautiful example of that. I love that it shows the day that I took to explore. I got that great score of more food than I had had access to for a while with that low tide. And then that afternoon, I felt more free to do a bigger explore because I felt like I had some calories in the bank. I hadn't done a lot of exploring before that because it was all survival. It was all getting that shelter made, getting that chimney in before it got so cold that I couldn't do that, getting food stored. This day was kind of a turning point for me because it was like, I actually have a little extra to be able to spend it to go and see the wider view of this landscape, explore a little bit further for resources, but also just to get out and do something for pleasure, be out in the wild, really seeing all of it. So that was a hike. That was a decent hike over some peaks, down through some boggy valleys, and then finally to the tallest mountain that was along that stretch of shoreline where I could see way inland. It also sees me talking about how I felt really wanted there. I felt Labrador loving me and giving to me, but it was in a really different way and a really different relationship than I had with the Northwest Territories on season 6, in that I just didn't feel immediately at home there and comfortable and totally in love with the place. I loved it and I knew that it loved me, but I had to work so hard for it. I felt like I really had to earn every day in Labrador. So it was absolutely love, but it was also tough love. And I felt like that really pushed me in a different way. And ultimately, it was really good for me. And I feel like in this episode, you can see me kind of starting to break through and have my whole heart in being there. It's not to say that it got way easier, but I arrived in a way. Love, love, love getting to see Michelle experience that milestone of this is the day that I tapped on season 8, but I am doing good right now. I am here. I am in it. It is working for me. And my body is so much better off. I am still in love with this place and this experience. And this is important to be here right now. She struggled with anorexia for a long time, and we can see in her build, she is so slight. She is already so slender. Struggling with that eating disorder was clearly a real formative experience for her. And again, she worked through it and became a stronger, more self-realized person for it. And also, building on the theme that we are seeing over and over, she turned to nature for healing and comfort. Nature was where she really found herself and understood who she was in relation to the greater world, and part of what healed her with her eating disorder. So I'm sure that's really up for her now, being out there so hungry, but knowing that she has already passed over so many big hurdles. There she is, showing us her body as she is cooking that grouse. So awesome that she got a grouse also, yay. And her pants are still fitting. She is not swimming in her clothes here on day 21. So what an accomplishment to get game, eat a wonderful meal, and still have her pants fitting on the day that she had to leave season 8 because her body was so wrecked. Yes. Awesome, Michelle. And after hearing about your own struggle to feel good enough, to feel worthy, which I really identify with, is just so beautiful to see you thriving out there. We then circle back to Callie, and it is windy, so windy. Oh my gosh, you guys, the weather there was so insane. I have to say, of all different weather conditions, wind is really challenging because it makes everything harder. It's so much colder. You have to work so much harder, harvesting firewood, harvesting poles, building materials. I would sometimes get turned around in a circle carrying a big bushy pole back to my shelter. Callie is having a really hard time bringing food in, not being able to eat mussels, which would probably extend to other seafood out there because they're going to be somewhat similar in terms of their makeup. It's a major handicap, and she's not doing great on her snare line. So she's really sitting with what that means for her. She knows the long-term consequences at this point of pushing her body so far. She has permanent damage from how far she pushed her body on season 7. So it's very present with her, as it is with all of us. But of all of us, she had the most serious consequences of pushing herself so hard last time. So it's coming up for her now. She doesn't have the calories. She's not able to keep her body warm, which means those frostbitten toes, she's much more aware of them. Totally awesome to get to see her get a squirrel. You can see how much that squirrel means to her. She is cradling it to her chest. It is so precious. That said, one squirrel is really not that many calories. It is maybe 1/3 to 1/5 of the calories her body needs per day. One in, 23, 24 days? It's nowhere near enough. We have to remember that Callie has that seal oil, so even though she's not getting protein, the seal oil is significantly more calories than probably either Michelle or I are getting from the mussels that we're able to eat because they are very low fat. They're really just protein. That said, Callie's also bigger. Michelle and I are both pretty small women, so Callie definitely has a higher metabolism than either of us, so it's clearly catching up with her here. Callie is talking about whether or not she should ration her squirrel. I am so glad she ate the whole squirrel. One squirrel is so little food, it would be awful to ration it. Better for your body to have more food at once and then go a little bit of time without than have just a teensy bit. The idea of rationing what is nowhere near enough food, it's not a good survival strategy. We also hear her talking about being really angry as a young woman at the world that could be so cruel for her brother to have to choose to leave it. And I really identify with this because I too had a lot of anger and depression at the state of the world as a young woman. As this episode shares, my educational background is in biology, my master's is in environmental science. I was very aware of the consequences of human action on the natural world and deeply attached to the natural world. So I really struggled with depression in my late teens and early 20s. And I too really found solace in spending a lot of time in the wild and learning those skills that allowed me to make different choices, learning ancestral skills, sometimes called primitive skills, tanning hides, harvesting wild foods, learning to make baskets from willows and spruce root, and making my own bows and arrows, really empowering myself with those skills and choosing to live in a different way than the ways that were harming the planet all around me. That made a really big difference. And that's part of why my work in the world is sharing those skills and why I'm so passionate about them. I have seen them make a tremendous difference in my own life and in the lives of the people who I share them with. Callie says something that I also say later in this episode about how important it is to have that sense of gratitude for food. She says, I always want to be this grateful for food. I say, I wish that I could give everyone the gift of knowing how valuable food is, how amazing it is when you know the difference, when you know what it is not to have it. I would love for everybody to experience that just so they could know how lucky they are. It then shows me making an offering plate to the ancestors, offering up the biggest, juiciest mussel, the biggest, juiciest cranberry to the ancestors, my own ancestors, the ancestors of that place, and the ancestors that are the rocks and the plants and the animals. And what an important practice it is when you don't have enough yourself to offer that up. It's like it multiplies the good of everything that you do have to be willing to give some up to something greater than yourself. You then see me going out to that extremely low tide, which was amazing, and actually being able to harvest a big quantity of mussels for the first time. And I went out there saying, my goal is 6 pots of mussels. 6 pots of mussels was only 3 days worth of food for me, because my plan and what I had been doing up until that point was 2 pots of mussels a day, 1 midday and 1 in the evening once I was tucked into my shelter for the night. So even 6 pots, that really wasn't that much. It wasn't enough to keep me out there long term, because there were a lot of days that I couldn't harvest at all, that the tide wasn't low enough, or it was crazy weather, or really dangerous for me to be getting down those steep rock cliffs to harvest them. And I really needed to be harvesting more than that. And I actually was able to. On that low tide, I got something like 12 pots. So significant portion of food stored away for later. So it felt really good. And it's part of my happier attitude that you're seeing out there in this episode. Also, sea urchins. Finding sea urchins was incredible. Now, they weren't easy to get. There was this shoal of rocks making a boundary, like a barrier reef, around my little beach, and the urchins were only on the deep side of that. So I had to get wet and get hypothermic to get those urchins. So I was really earning them. That's part of why I appreciated them so much. The thing about the urchin roe, so it's like they're like the ovaries, the egg sacs that make the roe, but you can see the little kernels of the eggs in there. And the thing about eggs is they're not just protein, but of course they are high in fat. And they were so creamy, so delicious. I could just feel my body slurping up that fat and turning it into energy right away. Pretty much when the tide was that low, I was there for hours, following the tide out, harvesting as much as I could, and then getting pushed back in. You can really see that in this episode, how it goes from bright light at first to almost in the shadows. At the same time, I was working hard to store those mussels. So I was harvesting them, and then I was building those mussel farms, piles of rocks in which I could safely store those mussels. So it was a tremendous amount of energy, but absolutely incredible to have access to that amazing resource. We get to see Callie experiencing the first snow. So beautiful, absolutely transforms that landscape. And she's absolutely right. It's a little more challenging for some survival things, but for the trapping, so key to be able to see the movements of the animals. Love this scene where each of us are talking about all of the others. And this is where I feel like we're starting to see a real difference in the energy of this episode now that it's just women out there. And they aren't doing the doom music and the do, oh, it's so dangerous, it's so scary. And it no longer feels like a competition, right? The alone thing, it tends to spin it as this big competition because it's the last one who grits it out there who wins. But we are all out there knowing that all of us can cross that finish line together, and we're sending each other so much love and so much good wishes. I love that about Frozen. And I don't think that that's actually different with just the women. I feel like that was true of the men out there as well. We wanted all of the others to do well, but you're really seeing in this episode how much love and care we are sending out to all of the others who might still be out there. And Callie talks about it. She talks about how women have a different way of being out in nature, a more flowing way. And I think that's really true. And I love that we are seeing on this season, the women really do well out there, coming at it with a very different attitude that we typically see in what is a more male-dominated field. The survival field tends to represent more big, strong guys, the more military background, that kind of thing. And we're seeing a real shift. I feel like we've been seeing that over time on the Alone show, but nothing exemplifies that like Frozen and where we're at in this season, where those women out there who are all about being deeply connected to nature, seeing themselves as part of nature, seeing it as where we really go for healing and where we find ourselves and our strongest selves. That's why we're still out there and doing well. Love that Callie named her shelter too Driftwood Castle, just like I have mine named the Storm Fortress. And I too had heart rocks. I had one particular heart rock that I used to make fire. I had it right at the top of that beautiful mantelpiece that I have on my chimney. It was really important to me and reminded me that I was out there for love and because of the love I felt coming from that landscape. I will say I've been concerned about Callie's shelter. That climate is so fierce, those winds are so strong, and still her shelter is wide open and her fire is outside her shelter. Those really low temperatures, those fierce storms, that blowing horizontal snow is coming, and her shelter is still wide open. The next shots of me show me getting my second hare, and oh my goodness, the joy and the excitement and the gratitude are just huge. I'm just bouncing with it. I just want so much everyone to feel that joy and that level of gratitude. What a different world it would be if we all had that level of appreciation for the gifts in our life, right? I hope that people can take that from these episodes and have a little bit more appreciation. I know you're probably eating nachos and chips right now while you are watching alone, and I think that's awesome. But take a minute, if you would, and just look at that food in front of you, smell it, eat it slowly, and really savor it. That is the gift of being an alone viewer. It is in this scene that you can see the special little contraption I have in my cooking hearth there, which is a stone that is midway up on the side of that lovely hearth. And that is my seaweed toasting stone. So the seaweed that you are seeing in all of these episodes, it is not delicious. It's actually pretty hard to choke down. It totally got my gag reflex. It was hard to eat. I finally discovered a way to make it not just edible, but absolutely delicious. So after I would steam my mussels, then I would cook the seaweed in that high protein salty mussel water, because when I cooked that seaweed in that mussel water, this brown goo would come out of it, and then I could dump that out. And after that point, the seaweed was delicious, but it still was not totally amazing until I discovered the secret of toasting the seaweed. So I would take that cooked seaweed with all of the gross brown stuff out, and then I would put it on that toasting stone, and it would dry and get browned and actually a little bit toasted and smoky, and then it was so delicious. It was like potato chips, not like the frozen sea ice potato chips that Callie tried earlier, but actually salty and crispy and nourishing and delicious. And it was a really nice thing to eat while I was cooking my mussels, or to have on hand as a little pick-me-up snack between doing other things. The first ever alone snack food. I discovered it, I made it regularly, and dang, it was awesome out there. Can you guys see it? On this rock right above my finger, there's a beautiful male California quail being a sentry, looking out to make sure everything is safe. A really cool thing to have in the background of the filming. This scene has me talking about my own journey to self-worth, and recognizing that while it definitely felt important for me on season 6 that it wasn't about the money, it was about the experience and the love for the place. But over time also realizing that that was all true, but there was also a part in there that didn't want to win because I wasn't sure that I could handle it. I didn't want all of the weird attention that came from it, and I just frankly wasn't sure that I felt worthy enough. And that was a big realization, and something I was working through a lot out there in Labrador, and you can see me really processing. We then have this lovely montage of Michelle talking and scenes of each of us sitting around our fire, just really appreciating being there, appreciating one another, talking about how well we are wishing all of the others out there. And then that scene where we all click off the camera to settle down for the night. It's a really beautiful sense of what the alone experience is, because there's so much time sitting by the fire, just thinking and processing. The next scene is Callie on day 25. It is the midpoint, right? And really wondering what to do. And I love that she is sitting there with the fire, and she is asking the fire, "What do I do, fire? What do I do?" This shows two things. One is taking our cues from nature. She is actively asking the fire for guidance. And this is something that I really felt out there too, and had all of these moments where I felt the land talking to me so distinctly. The first was the very first night when I stepped outside of my shelter to pee and had amazing northern lights. And to me, Labrador was saying, "Hey, we see you, we've got you, we want you here." Callie is saying, "Fire, what is my future here?" We saw Michelle talking about how I can feel Labrador want me here in a way that I never felt from Chilco Lake. My Chilco Lake experience was about me being here and connecting to Labrador. And here's where I really feel that sense of feeling connected to nature, listening to it, feeling it respond to us, feeling held by it, that is a key survival skill. It is about something deeper. And again, something I've talked about, which is having our nervous system regulated by our connection to the place. Talking to the fire actually keeps you company. It actually makes your body feel calmer and makes you feel like you are part of a community and not alone out there. It also demonstrates that fire in particular has such a powerful presence. We spend so much time with the fire when we're on alone. It is this flickering, moving entity. It is one thing that makes our time out there possible, makes it possible to cook our food, to purify our water, to warm our bodies and our shelters. So it is key, and it is hard out there in this very windy, very wet environment. So it's this beautiful dance and relationship. And I felt this really intense kinship and interplay with fire when I was out there. I had a little love song that I wrote to fire. Every time I was making a fire, I was singing that. We're seeing that spiritual piece really come to the forefront in this episode. Speaking of, do you hear that quail calling? She's looking to the fire for guidance, and then she chooses to make her bed outside for a night. Now, Callie has not closed the front of her shelter. Her fire is outside. She is letting that already weakened, starved body be exposed to the elements all the time out there, and that is drawing down her reserves dramatically. Callie is knowledgeable. She is experienced. She knows that the choices she is making are making staying out there harder. She says that. She says, maybe this is crazy, but I'm going to put my bed outside tonight. We hear her say that a couple times. This might be a bad idea, but maybe this is crazy, but I'm going to do this thing. Sleeping out under the stars is beautiful and it's inspiring, and those are important. We need to experience that beauty and feel inspired to stay out there, but it is not a choice that is consistent with long-term survival, especially in a weakened state when you don't have food coming in, and she knows that. She says it. We will see how it pans out for her, but I feel like I'm already seeing some answers sitting with her that she's not yet verbalizing or brought to the surface, reflected in the choices she's making right now. As always, we get a little teaser about what's coming in the next episode. We will talk about that gnarly cut on my finger when we get to the next episode. But let's circle back and talk about a few of the survival-related things that we see in this episode. So one thing is, as we see Michelle shooting at that grouse on the beach, we get a real good view of her bowstring and the little fuzzy bits on the top and bottom of her bowstring. So these are what we call string silencers. The thing with shooting a bow is that you're at much closer range than you would be with a rifle, and sound moves a lot faster than an arrow. So an issue with aiming is that when you release that string, the string slaps your bow with a ka-thunk noise, and the animals will hear that before the arrow can reach them. So a very common thing is for animals to go when they hear a noise. So it's not uncommon, if you are shooting without string silencers, for the animal to be several inches lower than it was when you aimed by the time your arrow reaches it. There's two things you can do about that. You can aim a little lower, anticipating that, or you can put string silencers on that are going to muffle the sound because the hairs are going to hit first and they're going to make the impact less by the time your string gets to your bow. Therefore, it's not going to be so loud and you're going to get less of a startle response. I used beaver fur. I think a lot of us out there had beaver fur, just a strip that is wound through the twining on our bowstring that's going to muffle that sound. Really key thing for archery hunting. You hear me talk so much in so many of these videos, especially this one, about this idea of connection as a survival skill. I'm talking about connection to nature, connection to ourselves, and that sense of self-worth that you hear that a lot of us, particularly as women, and members of this culture that tends to tear us down have to really work for. And also a connection to our human community and our human history and our ancestors, understanding that all of our ancestors lived in the wilderness, so we have that capacity as well. All of those things are hugely important. And I want to let you guys know that I have an online course called Connection is a Survival Skill that doesn't just talk about the whys, but actually gives practices for feeling more connected to the world around you, all of which is awesome training for having that deeper sense of connection that helps you do better in challenging survival situations in normal daily life, and just helps us be happier and more satisfied in general. And the idea is that these are all habits that we can build over time. We can't just expect them to magically appear because we know they are good for us. So my course really gives you tools to get to that point of feeling more connected. All right, you guys, as always, there is so much more that I could talk about, but there's going to be more opportunities to talk about these things and more in the next review. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.